The auctioneer's voice was tired, running through lot after lot like a machine that had forgotten how to stop. Nobody in the room was listening closely anymore. It was hour 4 of a government sell-off, and most of the buyers had already spent their money on ships, mining rights, and old weapon stockpiles from a war that had ended before most of them were born. What was left were the scraps nobody wanted, tossed into bulk lots just to clear the inventory list. Daniel Reyes sat near the back, arms crossed, watching numbers scroll past on a cracked screen bolted to the wall. He was not there to buy anything big. He could not afford anything big. 6 months ago, he had been a cargo hauler with his own ship and a decent route through 3 systems. Now his ship belonged to a bank on a planet he never wanted to see again, and his scrapyard on the edge of human territory was barely paying its own power bill. He had come to this auction hoping to find cheap parts, maybe an old reactor coil, something he could resell for enough credits to keep the lights on another month. The lot that came up was almost an afterthought. The auctioneer barely read the description before moving on. Lot 441. Hangar and unknown contents. Planet Dust Hollow. Sold as is. No inspection available. Opening bid, $1. A few people laughed. Somewhere near the front, someone made a joke about buying dust with dust. Dust Hollow had a reputation. It had been a forward supply depot during the Old War, stripped of anything valuable decades ago, then abandoned when the fighting moved elsewhere. Nobody had lived there in years. The listing did not even come with photos, only a warning that the site had not been surveyed since the original owners left. Daniel almost let it pass like everyone else. But something about the words unknown contents caught in his mind. He had learned, in his years hauling cargo, that unknown sometimes meant nothing at all, and sometimes meant nobody had bothered to look. For $1, the risk was nothing. He raised his hand before he could talk himself out of it. The auctioneer blinked, checked the screen, and shrugged. Sold. Lot 441, to the human in the back. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room. Someone behind him muttered that he had just bought $1 worth of nothing. Daniel did not care. He signed the transfer on his handheld, paid the single dollar plus a small planetary filing fee, and walked out before anyone could ask him why. He called Walter Briggs that night from his cramped office at the scrapyard. Walter had been a fleet engineer once, long before the war ended and the fleet shrank down to almost nothing. Now he helped Daniel keep the scrapyard's old equipment running, mostly out of boredom and loyalty. "You bought a hangar on Dust Hollow," Walter said, not quite believing it. "For $1. For $1, Daniel confirmed. "That place has been picked clean twice over. First by the fleet when they pulled out, then by every scrapper with a working ship for 20 years after. There's nothing left there but wind and rust." "Maybe," Daniel said, "but nobody's actually been inside in a long time." The listing said unsurveyed. That means somebody sealed it up and never came back to check what was in it. Walter was quiet for a moment. "You want to go look?" "I want to go look." It took them 3 days to reach Dust Hollow in Walter's old transport, a ship held together more by stubbornness than by good engineering. The planet came into view slowly, a gray-brown world with thin clouds and no visible green anywhere. From orbit, it looked exactly like its name suggested, a place that had given up trying to be anything. The hangar itself was not hard to find. It sat at the edge of what had once been a supply base, half buried by decades of blowing sand, its outer doors bent and rusted but still standing. Walter set the transport down nearby, and the two of them stepped out into thin, dry air that smelled faintly of old metal. Up close, the hangar was bigger than either of them expected. The surface structure alone could have held a dozen mid-sized ships. Daniel walked along the outer wall, running a gloved hand over plating that had clearly been built to survive worse than time and weather. "This wasn't just storage," Walter said, studying the foundation. "Look at the depth markers. There's more of this building underground than above it." Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a small spark of the excitement he had not felt since he lost his ship. He had bought $1 worth of nothing, and it was already turning out to be bigger than anyone at that auction had guessed. Whatever was down there, nobody had touched it in years. Whatever it was his now. He looked at the sealed access hatch near the base of the hangar, dust-caked and half-swallowed by drifted sand, and felt an urge he could not quite explain to get it open before nightfall. Walter must have felt something similar, because he was already pulling tools from the transport without being asked. Neither of them said it out loud, but both were thinking the same thing. A place this big, sealed this well, forgotten this completely, did not stay empty by accident. Someone had wanted it forgotten. Daniel intended to find out why. Sand had a way of hiding things it did not want found, and the access hatch at the base of the hangar had been buried under it for what looked like decades. Walter cleared it with a hand shovel, while Daniel worked a portable scanner over the surrounding wall, trying to get any kind of reading on what lay beneath. The scanner kept returning the same strange result. Power. Faint, old, but real power, coming from somewhere underground. That can't be right, Walter said, wiping dust off his gloves. Nothing's had working power out here since the fleet pulled its generators. Unless it wasn't the fleet's generator, Daniel said. They worked through the afternoon, cutting away rusted bolts and prying at a hatch that had clearly not been opened by anyone in a very long time. When it finally gave way, cool air rushed up from below, carrying a faint metallic smell that neither of them could place. A set of stairs led down into darkness, still intact, still solid despite the years. Daniel went first, flashlight cutting a narrow path through the dark. The stairway went deeper than either of them expected, far past what the surface hangar alone would have suggested. After several minutes of careful descent, the stairs opened into a wide corridor with walls unlike anything in the supply depot above. The surface structure had been simple military construction, plain metal and function over form. This was different. The walls down here were smooth, almost seamless, marked with lines of symbols neither of them recognized. That's not fleet writing, Walter said quietly. That's not Concorde writing either. I've seen Concorde ships up close during the war. This isn't that. They pressed on, flashlights sweeping across walls that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The corridor ended at a massive door, far larger than anything a simple storage hangar would need, its surface covered in the same unfamiliar symbols, glowing faintly along thin seams that had clearly once carried power. Daniel reached out and touched the surface. It was warm. This whole place is still active, he said. After all this time, something down here still has power. Walter pulled out a handheld scanner of his own, running it slowly across the door. His face went pale as the readings came back. Daniel, whatever's behind this door, it's not scrap. There's a containment field still running. Something is being kept sealed in there on purpose. For a moment, neither of them moved. Every instinct that had kept Daniel alive through years of hauling cargo through dangerous stretches of space told him to walk away, get back to the transport, and never think about Dust Hollow again. But he had spent 6 months watching his old life fall apart piece by piece, and something about standing in front of a sealed door that had survived decades untouched made him feel, for the first time in a long while, like he was standing in front of something that actually mattered. We came this far, he said. It took both of them working together to find the manual release hidden beneath a panel near the base of the door, a crude override clearly meant for emergencies rather than everyday use. When Daniel finally forced it open, the door did not swing so much as it groaned, metal shrieking against metal after years of stillness, sliding aside just enough for them to slip through. What waited on the other side stole the breath from both of them. The chamber beyond was enormous, far larger than the hangar above had any right to contain, its ceiling lost somewhere in darkness far overhead. And filling nearly the entire space was a ship. Not a transport, not a cargo hauler, not anything either of them had ever seen in fleet records or Concorde catalogs. It was a warship, ancient by the look of its design, its hull dark and pitted with age but unmistakably whole. Faint lights pulsed along sections of its surface, slow and steady, like something breathing in its sleep. Walter took a step back, his scanner nearly forgotten in his hand. That's not possible. Something that size, that old, still holding power after all this time. This isn't fleet tech. This isn't Concorde tech. I don't know what this is. Daniel could not take his eyes off it. Every line of the ship suggested purpose, not decoration, built by hands that understood exactly what they wanted it to do. It did not look abandoned. It looked like it was waiting. Whoever sealed this place, Daniel said slowly. They didn't want anyone finding this. They buried an entire warship under a storage depot and let the planet's reputation do the rest of the work, keeping people away. Then maybe we should leave it buried, Walter said, though his voice lacked conviction even as he said it. Daniel took a step closer to the ship, drawn forward despite every warning bell in his mind. As he moved, a low hum rose somewhere deep within the hull, faint but unmistakable, like something ancient stirring after a very long sleep. Walter grabbed his arm. "Daniel." "I feel it too," Daniel said quietly. The lights along the hull brightened, one section at a time, tracing a slow path toward them. Whatever this ship was, whatever it had been sealed away to protect, it had just noticed they were there. And for the first time since they had opened that door, Daniel had the distinct feeling that they were no longer the only ones deciding what happened next. Light without warning is a strange kind of fear, the sort that hits the body before the mind has time to catch up. One moment the chamber was dim and quiet, lit only by their flashlights and the slow pulse of the ship's hull. The next, a section of the floor near the ship's underside split open with a hiss, and a turret no larger than a person's torso rose from the gap, already tracking toward them. Walter reacted first, years of old fleet training taking over before thought could slow him down. He grabbed Daniel by the collar and threw them both sideways behind a support column just as the turret fired. The shot missed by less than a meter, scorching a black line into the smooth wall behind where they had been standing a second earlier. "Move," Walter shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber had only one exit, and it was on the far side of the turret's line of fire. Daniel's heart hammered as he pressed himself against the column, scanner and flashlight forgotten in the sand at his feet. He had faced pirates once, years ago, during a bad run through a lawless stretch of space. This felt worse. That turret had not hesitated for even a second, and it clearly was not finished. A second shot cracked against the column, close enough that dust and stone chips rained down on both of them. Daniel closed his eyes, certain the next one would not miss. It never came. The turret's motion stopped mid-swing, frozen in place as if some invisible hand had simply reached out and shut it down. The low hum that had filled the chamber since they arrived deepened, spreading through the floor and up into the walls, until it settled into something that almost sounded like a held breath. A voice followed, not loud, not threatening, but clear enough to fill the entire chamber without any obvious source. Unauthorized presence detected. Stayed intent. Walter and Daniel exchanged a look. Neither of them moved from behind the column. "We're not here to steal anything," Daniel called out, his voice shakier than he would have liked. "We didn't even know this place existed until today. Biological signatures do not match any recorded authorization," the voice continued. "Species unknown. Clearance denied." "Then why did it stop shooting?" Walter whispered. As if in answer, the voice spoke again. "Lethal response paused pending evaluation. Explain purchase of this facility." Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the specificity of the question. "Somehow, this thing knew about the auction. I bought the hangar above us. Legally, through a government sale. Nobody told me there was anything down here." A long pause followed, long enough that Daniel began to wonder if the conversation was over. Then the lights along the ship's hull shifted color, moving from a pale blue to a deeper, steadier gold. "Records confirm transaction," the voice said. "Ownership transfer recognized under applicable authority. Reassessing threat status." Walter slowly stepped out from behind the column, hands raised, though there was no visible weapon aimed at them anymore. "Who or what are we talking to?" "Designation: Keeper," the voice replied. "Function: guardian and custodian of this vessel and its contents, assigned prior to sealing of this facility. Duration of dormancy: unrecorded due to extended power conservation. Estimated centuries." Daniel stepped out beside Walter, staring up at the massive hull looming over them. "Centuries. You've been sitting down here, alone, for centuries." "Correct," the keeper answered, its tone carrying no particular emotion, though something in the steadiness of it suggested a kind of patience built from necessity rather than choice. "Guardianship duties do not conclude until relieved by appropriate authority or until mission parameters are otherwise satisfied." "What exactly are you guarding?" Walter asked. "That information is restricted pending verification of intent," the keeper said. "Unauthorized disclosure carries unacceptable risk." Daniel felt frustration rising, tangled together with the strange excitement that had been building in him since they first found the sealed door. "You almost killed us a minute ago. I think we've earned a little more than that." "Survival was never guaranteed for unauthorized visitors," the keeper replied simply. That you remain functional is a result of reassessment, not entitlement. Walter placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, a silent warning not to push too hard, too fast. Whatever this thing was, it had already proven it could end their lives in an instant if it changed its mind again. What would it take, Daniel asked carefully, for you to trust us enough to explain what's actually going on here? For the first time, the keeper's response came slower, almost as if it were considering the question rather than simply retrieving a stored answer. Trust is not granted through words. It is demonstrated through action, under observation, across defined trials. Should you wish to proceed, the process may begin immediately. Should you decline, you may depart this facility, and this vessel will return to dormancy, sealed once again from all future contact. Daniel looked at Walter, and Walter looked back at him with the same mixture of caution and curiosity that had gotten them into this chamber in the first place. 6 months ago, Daniel had been ready to give up on everything he had built. Now he was standing in front of a centuries-old guardian intelligence, being offered a choice that could either end quietly or change everything. "We'll do it," Daniel said. "Whatever the trials are, we're in." The gold light along the ship's hull pulsed once, steady and deliberate, as if some ancient machine, after centuries of silence, had finally decided that waiting alone was no longer necessary. Trust, it turned out, was a slow and exhausting thing to earn from a machine that had spent centuries alone with nothing but its own caution to keep it company. Over the following days, the keeper set task after task, none of them violent, all of them designed to test something Daniel could not quite name until he was already deep into the process. It asked him to solve problems with no clear reward attached. It offered him access to small stores of valuable material within the ship and then observed, in silence, whether he tried to take more than he was given permission to. It placed Walter in a simulated failure of the ship's life support and watched how quickly Daniel prioritized his friend's safety over the mission itself. By the 4th day, Daniel had stopped trying to guess what the keeper wanted to see. He simply acted the way he always had, tired and frustrated, but never willing to leave Walter behind, never willing to take more than what was fairly his. It was only afterward, sitting on a supply crate in the chamber with Walter beside him, that the keeper finally spoke without being prompted. "Evaluation complete," it said. "Trust threshold met." Daniel sat up straighter. "That's it. We're done. The trials are complete," the keeper confirmed. "Full disclosure may now proceed." By this point, Daniel had brought in outside help. A woman named Nora Ibsen, a xeno-archivist working out of a small research outpost 2 systems away, had been quietly hired to help translate the unfamiliar symbols covering the ship's walls. She had been skeptical when Daniel first contacted her, certain the whole thing was either a hoax or a waste of her limited funding. That skepticism disappeared the moment she stepped into the chamber and saw the ship for herself. "These markings," she said, running gloved fingers just above the surface of the nearest wall, careful not to touch it directly. "They're not from any cataloged culture. Not Fleet, not Concord, not anything currently active in this sector. Whatever built this ship predates most of what we know about galactic history." "Correct," the keeper said, startling her slightly. "This vessel and its contents originate from a civilization that no longer exists. Records identify them as the Havenar." Nora's breath caught. The Havenar are considered myth. A handful of fragmented references in old Concord archives, nothing confirmed. Most scholars assume the name was invented to explain gaps in older records. "The Havenar existed," the keeper said. "Their civilization ended in a conflict predating recorded galactic history by several thousand years. Prior to their destruction, they undertook efforts to preserve what remained of their people and knowledge, distributing archives and safeguards across multiple sealed locations. This facility is one such location." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's cool air. What exactly did they leave behind? The keeper's answer came slowly, deliberately, as if even after centuries of guarding this secret, sharing it still carried weight. 2 primary elements. First, a complete genetic and cultural archive of the Havenar people, preserved against total extinction of their knowledge and history. Second, a defensive system designed to prevent recurrence of the conflict that destroyed them, intended as a failsafe rather than a weapon of conquest. Nora sat down slowly on a nearby crate. clearly trying to process the scale of what she was hearing. An entire extinct civilization's history, sitting under a scrapyard on Dust Hollow. There is more, the Keeper continued. Prior to their destruction, the Hangar made contact with an early, developing species located on a distant world. Limited assistance was provided, quietly, without direct intervention in that species' development. Records indicate this contact contributed to certain foundational advancements in that species' early history. Daniel felt something settle heavily in his chest. What species? Human, the Keeper said. This facility and its contents were configured to fully open only under authorization by a descendant of that species, verified through prolonged demonstration of trustworthy conduct. You are the first such individual to meet that threshold since this site was sealed. For a long moment, nobody in the chamber spoke. Walter finally broke the silence with a short, disbelieving laugh. You're telling me humanity got a helping hand from a dead alien civilization thousands of years ago, and nobody in the history books ever knew? Correct, the Keeper said simply. Daniel looked up at the massive hull surrounding them. No longer just an ancient warship, but something closer to an inheritance he had never asked for and barely understood. He thought of every time he had watched other species in the Concord treat humanity as an afterthought, a minor player too new and too disorganized to matter in the larger galactic order. None of them knew what was sitting quietly beneath a worthless patch of dirt on a forgotten world. So what happens now, he asked, now that I've apparently passed your test? Now, the Keeper said, its voice carrying, for the first time, something that almost resembled purpose renewed after a long wait. Full systems may be restored under your authorization. However, be advised, energy signatures from this activation, though contained within this facility, are unlikely to remain entirely undetected. Interest from external parties should be anticipated. Daniel exchanged a look with Walter and Nora, the weight of the choice settling over all three of them at once. Whatever they did next, Dust Hollow was not going to stay forgotten much longer. News traveled faster than any of them expected, and it did not come from the Keeper's warning about detectable energy signatures. It came from a man named Victor Alder, a salvage broker Daniel had crossed paths with years earlier during better times. Victor had a talent for knowing exactly which questions to ask and exactly who to sell the answers to. And when he heard through a supplier that Daniel had bought a hangar on Dust Hollow and then quietly chartered a research trip out there with an archivist in tow, his curiosity turned into something far more calculated. It did not take Victor long to trace the story back far enough to catch wind of unusual energy readings being logged by a distant orbital sensor station, readings that matched no known human or Concord signature in that sector. He put the pieces together with the ease of a man who had spent years learning how to profit from other people's discoveries, and instead of contacting Daniel, he sold the information to a Concord liaison office eager for anything that might explain an unregistered power source in a supposedly abandoned region of space. Daniel had no idea any of this had happened until the Keeper's systems detected 3 unfamiliar ships entering orbit above Dust Hollow, moving with the deliberate formation of a coordinated approach rather than casual visitors. Concord vessels, the Keeper announced, the golden light along its hull shifting toward a sharper amber. Configuration suggests official inquiry, likely military or governmental. Estimated arrival at surface facility, 40 minutes. Nora looked up sharply from the console she had been working at, translating fragments of Hangar text with the ship's help. How would the Concord even know to look here? Insufficient data to determine the leak's source, the Keeper said. However, probability suggests deliberate disclosure rather than accidental detection. Walter's jaw tightened. Someone talked. Daniel thought immediately of Victor, though he had no proof beyond old instinct and the man's well-known reputation for selling anything that turned a profit. There was no time to confirm it now. 40 minutes was barely enough time to think, let alone prepare for whatever the Concord intended to do once they arrived. What happens if they take control of this facility? Daniel asked the Keeper directly. Unknown with certainty, the Keeper replied. However, historical Concord policy regarding unclassified pre-Concord technology strongly favors seizure and reclassification under military authority, particularly given this facility's defensive capabilities. Probability of the archive being preserved intact under such seizure is low. Probability of the failsafe system being repurposed for offensive use is considered elevated. Nora's face went pale. They'd turn a failsafe meant to prevent another Havenar-style war into a weapon. That assessment aligns with recorded Concord conduct in comparable historical situations, the Keeper confirmed. Daniel felt the weight of the decision settle onto his shoulders with sudden, crushing clarity. This was no longer just about a lucky find at a government auction. It was about whether an ancient civilization's last surviving legacy would be honored the way it had been intended, or stripped down and weaponized by people who had never once considered humanity worth listening to. "We're not handing this over," Daniel said. Walter nodded firmly, already moving toward the small stockpile of defensive equipment they had brought from the scrapyard, meager as it was compared to what was approaching. "Then we'd better figure out how to buy time. This facility possesses functional defensive systems," the Keeper offered. "However, full activation requires explicit authorization from you, as recognized custodian. I have withheld this step pending your decision." Daniel looked up at the massive hull surrounding them, thinking of everything the Keeper had explained over the past several days: the archive, the failsafe, the quiet debt owed to a species that no longer existed but had once chosen to help humanity without asking for anything in return. He thought about every Concord official who had ever looked at humans like they were a problem to be managed rather than a people to be respected. "Do it," Daniel said. "Authorize full activation." The chamber around them responded instantly. Lights that had pulsed gently along the hull for centuries surged into sharp, steady brightness. Somewhere deep within the ship, systems that had waited generations for this exact moment began coming fully online, section by section, like something enormous finally exhaling after holding its breath far too long. Outside, above Dust Hollow's dusty gray surface, the Concord ships continued their approach, unaware that the abandoned depot they were preparing to seize was no longer sleeping. Nora gripped the edge of the console, watching status readouts scroll faster than she could fully track. How much of this ship can actually still function after all this time? "Assessment ongoing," the Keeper said. "Preliminary results indicate core systems remain fully operational." Walter allowed himself a short, tense laugh, the kind that came from nerves rather than humor. "Centuries of dust and rust, and this thing still works better than most fleet ships built last year." Daniel stared up at the ship rising to full readiness around them, feeling something settle inside him that was part fear and part something close to pride. Whatever happened next, he was no longer just the man who had bought a worthless hangar for $1. He was standing in the middle of a decision that was about to decide far more than his own future. The Concord ships continued their descent, unaware that Dust Hollow was about to stop being forgotten. Dust rose in thick clouds across the surface of Dust Hollow as the first Concord shuttle touched down near the ruined outer hangar, its landing struts kicking up decades of undisturbed grit. Two more followed close behind, forming a loose triangle around the entrance Daniel and Walter had forced open only days earlier. A squad of armored Concord officers moved out first, followed by a single official in formal gray, clearly there to oversee whatever seizure had been authorized from higher up the chain of command. The official's name did not matter to Daniel, not anymore. What mattered was the confidence in the man's stride, the assumption written plainly across his posture that whatever waited below belonged to the Concord simply because they had decided it should. That confidence lasted exactly until the ground beneath the hangar's surface began to hum. The reaction among the officers was immediate. Weapons raised, formations tightened, voices barked orders through helmet comms as the entire hangar structure shuddered, sand sliding off buried plating that had not moved in decades. Deep beneath their feet, the ancient warship stirred fully awake for the first time in centuries, its presence reaching the surface not as a visible shape yet, but as a pressure in the air, a vibration felt more than heard. Inside the chamber below, Daniel stood beside the Keeper's central console, watching status readouts shift and stabilize across systems that had waited generations for this exact test. "Talk to me," he said. "What's happening up there?" "Concord forces have breached the outer perimeter," the Keeper reported, "attempting forced entry into the primary access corridor. Recommend immediate deployment of surface defenses." "Do it," Daniel said. Non-lethal if you can manage it. I don't want this turning into a massacre. Acknowledged, the keeper replied. Adjusting response parameters. Above ground, the hangar's outer plating split open along seams that had not moved since before the Concorde officers' grandparents were born, revealing defensive emplacements that had spent centuries patiently waiting. Rather than lethal fire, precise bursts of concentrated energy swept across the officers' formation, disabling weapons and armor systems without a single fatal shot. Confusion spread through the Concorde ranks as their equipment failed one piece at a time, rifles overheating, shield generators shorting out, the entire assault grinding to a halt before it had properly begun. The gray-suited official shouted orders that nobody could effectively carry out, his authority meaning nothing against a system designed centuries ago by a civilization far more advanced than the one he represented. Below, Walter watched the readouts with something close to disbelief. They're not even getting close to the door. Correct, the keeper confirmed. Facility defenses remain within designed operational parameters, despite extended dormancy. Nora, still seated at her translation console, looked over at Daniel with wide eyes. You realize what this means, don't you? An ancient, extinct civilization built something so far beyond current Concorde technology that a modern military force can't even breach the front door. Daniel did realize it, and the weight of that realization sat heavy and strange in his chest. For as long as he could remember, humanity had been treated as the newest, least respected member of galactic civilization, tolerated more than valued, always trailing behind older, more established powers. Now, standing in the middle of a secret older than most of those powers combined, he understood that the story the galaxy told about humanity's place in it had never accounted for something like this. Outside, the Concorde official finally gave the order to withdraw, unwilling to risk further embarrassment against defenses his own forces could not overcome. The shuttles lifted off in a hurried retreat, leaving scorch marks and disabled equipment scattered across ground that, only hours earlier, they had approached with total confidence. They're leaving, Walter said, watching the readouts as the Concorde ships climbed back into orbit and jumped away. The keeper's tone, if it could be called that, carried something almost like satisfaction. Threat neutralized without loss of life. Facility integrity maintained. Guardianship objective fulfilled. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the tension of the past several days finally begin to loosen its grip. What happens now? With the archive, the failsafe, all of it. That determination rests with you, the keeper said. As recognized custodian, authority over disclosure, use, and future guardianship belongs to you. Nora looked between Daniel and the massive ship surrounding them. You understand this changes everything, right? Word of what happened here won't stay quiet for long. Every government in the sector is going to want to know what humanity is suddenly sitting on. Daniel thought about that for a long moment. Thought about every dismissive comment he had endured over the years from species who considered humans too new, too disorganized, too unimportant to matter. He thought about the dollar he had spent on a joke of an auction lot, and the centuries-old civilization that had quietly chosen to help humanity long before anyone else believed it was worth helping. Let them find out, Daniel said finally. Humanity's spent long enough being underestimated. Maybe it's time that changed. Above Dust Hollow's dusty gray surface, the wind continued to blow exactly as it always had, indifferent to everything that had just taken place beneath it. But far below, inside a chamber that had waited centuries in silence, something ancient had finally woken up, and the story of what humanity had truly inherited was only just beginning.